So, welcome to the UFC 290 post show. And I gotta tell you, I honestly thought that there was a chance that I was gonna be able to miss out this fight tonight. I can't really go into details as to why I'm not at home or what I'm doing out of town, but nonetheless, just know that I'm at a hotel somewhere in Southern California around Anaheim, and I had to do some things, but I was able to sneak in and watch the fight in its whole entirety. I'm talking about the whole entire card. Now, what was one of the most shocking aspects of this entire card? For one, the Dricus du Plessis fight was the most shocking result in the entire card. I predicted the entire main card correctly. I knew that Pantoja had a chance to win because of the fact that he already went in there and beat the likes of Brandon Moreno. I knew that Volkanovski was going to win. I didn't think that he would get a finish, but it showed the new level that he was at. And once again, fair enough, that kind of shows a different level that Dricus du Plessis has as well. For him to be able to finish somebody like Robert Whittaker, nobody finishes Robert Whittaker first and foremost. So that in and of itself was a shocking result. Also, the fact that Bo Nickel was able to get that first round knockout, that in and of itself was shocking as well, because I did predict a first round finish, although with a submission, but that's not exactly what happened. Bo Nickel was able to go in there and knock out Val Woodburn just by using his hands. And by the way, this is not unusual for Bo Nickel to do this, because early in his pro career, when he was fighting under Jorge Masvidal's organization, the guy was knocking dudes out using his hands to try to prove, to basically say that, you know what, I can knock people out and I don't have to use my wrestling. And that's exactly what he proved in tonight's fight. Also, what else had happened tonight? Robbie Lawler had a historic career and then knew that he was going to have his last fight tonight and ended it in a way that a lot of people don't end their careers. A lot of guys that stay a little too long, or guys that stay in this fight business to the point where they are battered and beaten to the point where they just have nothing left. And then what happens? They end up leaving the business with not only broken bodies, not only CTE, not only having situations where they're broke because they just didn't have the sufficient amount of funds to continue on with their career, but Robbie Lawler beat all that. Sure, he didn't go out on top the way that, let's say, George St. Pierre, Joe Calzaghe, Floyd Mayweather, he didn't go out like that, but he went out in the best way possible that you can go out as a veteran mixed martial arts fighter without being a champion. But he was also a former champion, just to add more into his resume leaving. Jimmy Crute versus Manafield. Wow. They fought to a draw the last time that they had fought in Australia, which was back in UFC 284. Only for them to come back tonight and for Manafield to get a second round submission just out of nowhere. Gomez versus Yasmin. Gomez had a first round knockout against Yasmin, who was an undefeated prospect. And that was a shocking part in of itself. This whole entire card, I gotta say, had a lot of shocking results. And the way that people were going into this fight card, they were a little hesitant in terms of saying to themselves, well, you know what, I don't know if this is the type of card I'm going to invest in. And even myself, I thought to myself, well, you know what, I'm here on, quote unquote, a business trip of some sort, so I can't just go out and watch this fight. And then I thought, you know what, it's not the Errol Spence versus Spence card. It's not a Manny Pacquiao versus Floyd Mayweather type of card. It's not a John Jones versus Francis Ngannou type of card with that type of anticipation. But guess what? Because this is the theater of the unknown, that in and of itself is the reason why this card was as amazing as it was. You had, again, a prospect like Yasmin, 10-0, going into this fight, getting knocked out by Gomez. And then Manafield and Crute they had a draw in their first fight, only for a finish to come about in this particular fight. And Manafield, for him to be able to catch him with a guillotine choke after Crute went and shot in for a takedown. And then Petrino versus Pacino, you had a third round submission. And then you had Siam versus Mitchell, who, by the way, is a training partner of Dricus du Plessis. Now, interestingly enough, going into this fight, they stayed at the Palms in Vegas during this fight week, right? And then one of the owners of the Palms, who happened to be a South African guy, heard these guys talk in their native South African language, which is Afrikaner or some sort. It's a mixture of Dutch and a local African language that they created when, let's say, the Europeans came in there and colonized that place, right? So they heard these guys and they're like, well, you know what? You guys are from the same country, so we're going to go and take care of you. So they had the best accommodations going into this fight. And I thought that was really interesting when Daniel Cormier brought that up as Simon was walking into that fight against Mitchell. Now, why is that interesting? Because, first and foremost, what a lot of people don't understand about mixed martial arts is that one of the reasons why a lot of guys win, and you can even cite this in boxing as well, is because they have the right resources. They have the right people around them. They have the right resources to help them with their training, with their camp, with bringing in people to help them spar, with bringing in good training partners and nutritionists and different coaches for different types of things that you want to do to be a successful mixed martial artist. Khabib had something similar to that, where he had this Dagestani billionaire who later became an outlaw to the Russian state and got tortured by Vladimir Putin and got his sponsorship taken away. And even McGregor, in their press conference for the UFC 229 card, even mentioned that. So it's a really important thing to understand that having the right resources in mixed martial arts is a very important aspect in your career. And then you had a first round KO with Aguilar and Ross. By the way, just less than 60 seconds of a knockout. I mean, it was just absolutely devastating. Ross came and flew out there all the way from Australia only to get knocked out in that period of time, short period of time. And Aguilar representing for the Mexicans in mixed martial arts in their ever-growing evolution of fighting, because as you know, Mexico is a very big boxing country. Well, now they've evolved into their fighting style in terms of becoming this quintessential combat sports community in MMA, and then having all these champions in mixed martial arts, and in particular in the UFC. Ribovich gets his decision win tonight. Very close fight. Very, very close in a way where I thought I had him losing in the first half of the fight, but then he came back and persevered, got a few takedowns of his own, got a few good knocks in terms of knocking Kirk to the ground and hitting him and rocking him, which I think really swayed the judges to his favor, which was the first fight of the night. And then you had Edgar Chavez versus Taira getting a decision. The Japanese fighter mounting him a few times, having a good ground and pound from the top. Taira is one of those guys that I think is going to be a real problem in that division, and we'll see. You know, it was one of those fights that was under the radar tonight, but nonetheless, still a banger and a great one to lead us into Lawler versus Price. I mean, we had a lot of quick knockouts tonight, which I thought was really interesting. And you know what? I tell you this. The reason why I was able to even watch a lot of these fights in a way that I didn't anticipate I was going to, because of the busy time that I had going on, was based on all the reasons of all these quick knockouts and submissions that had happened tonight. And then somewhere down the line, I had to go sneak off and try to watch these fights and all that. But in the end, I was able to watch them. And yeah. So Pantoja versus Brandon Moreno, I'm not really surprised about that outcome. Now, the way that Pantoja was able to take the back of, what's his name? Brendan Moreno didn't really surprise me. It wasn't really that surprising to see that this was the trajectory that Pantoja was going to go into. I mean, he was on a hot streak. Brendan Moreno had these wars, and eventually it caught up to him, very similar to Robert Whittaker. It had all caught up to him. And then in the end, I think what was the highlight of the night in terms of not just fighting and in terms of storylines and everything in between was none other than Israel Adesanya walking into the cage, dropping N-bombs and this and that. And by the way, I'm currently watching Dana White doing a post-fight interview, and then they mentioned something to the effect of, well, what do you think about Israel Adesanya saying the N-bomb and then these racial implications and this and that? And Dana White gave the most shocking answer ever. He said something to the effect where, you know what, he's black, he's allowed to say that. And what president of a fighting organization will ever say anything like that? What Dana White said. I mean, it was just absolutely brilliant stuff. And like I said, going into this fight, I never thought that Dricus du Plessis had what it took to beat Robert Whittaker, but he did. In time, eventually, what a lot of people have to understand is that eventually everything is going to dwindle. Everything is going to be in a downfall trajectory. And we've seen that tonight with Robert Whittaker. All the wars that he had, nobody could finish this guy. Only Israel Adesanya. But at the same time, the fact that Israel Adesanya finished him showed that he does have great susceptibility to getting finished. Robert Whittaker has been finished by Wonderboy Thompson before, if you guys don't remember. So, what else was in a fight tonight? So we had, Bo Nickel and Val. And then how about Dan Hooker versus Jalen Turner? Now, I had predicted this correctly based on the fact that the only way that Dan Hooker was going to win was play a very methodical fight, and that's exactly what he did. And by the way, he broke his arm during this fight and was able to come back and persevere out of that adversity. He broke his hand or his arm during the fight, and I believe it was one of those exchanges either from the kicks that Jalen Turner had thrown. And by the way, how about that head kick that Dan Hooker was able to take? That alone, let me tell you something. Him taking that head kick, if he had done nothing the whole entire fight, he still deserved to win that based on that. But the fact is, Dan Hooker played the right game. He played the right game plan. He played he played his cards correctly in order for him to get the W. And I think that he did exactly what I had mentioned he should have done in terms of winning by the keys to the victory, which is what I mentioned. Fight methodical, fight very careful. But none of that really happened in that sense that it was a war. It was a back and forth war. He had to take some bumps along the way, but once again, he kind of showed his veteran savviness for him to be able to withstand all this punishment and then come back and get a few takedowns from Jalen Turner and getting a few good shots in there. I mean, it was a great night for City Kickboxing overall. Volkanovski is now considered one of the top 145ers ever, right? He beat an interim champion. I mean, this is a champion versus champion fight. And how about the fact that Donald Trump was present in the card tonight, right? Another UFC card that he had attended. I think that Trump attends more UFC fights as a former president than he did when he was a current president. Now, obviously, he went and attended the Jorge Masvidal versus Nate Diaz card because that was a big card. That was a very important card. It had some important implications behind it. But at the same time, it wasn't really like how do I say this? I mean, it was a big card, but man, it wasn't like George St. Pierre versus Anderson Silva type of card. But similar to what they did for UFC 291 in the next month, or in this coming month, next pay-per-view, they added a BMF belt to it to sort of give it like some sort of ribbon. Why am I saying rainbow? Ribbon. It was basically a ribbon wrapped around it to say, like, you know what, this is the reason why you have to go watch this fight, and this is the reason why we have to have the former president or the current president at the time attend this card. But nonetheless, it was a great night of fights, and I'm really looking forward to what's going to happen with Israel Adesanya versus Dricus du Plessis. Now, what else had happened tonight? Lawler, we covered Lawler, we covered Taira versus Edgar Chariz, Yasmin versus Gomez, Crute versus Menefield, submission, Simon versus Mitchell, Ross Aguilar, so we covered the entire fight now in terms of the entire card. So what's next after this? What comes for Robert Whittaker? I think Robert Whittaker becomes a gatekeeper for the 185 division if he continues. I think that he only has maybe a couple of fights left, and I think that the way that he's going to go about at the end of his career is he's going to become a gatekeeper. He's going to be in some important matches. Maybe he'll even headline a few fight nights. Maybe he'll even be part of some main card pay-per-view matchups. But I think that the fact that he had already lost twice to Israel Adesanya, and the fact that he now just lost to a top contender, and by the way, by Tuesday, you're probably going to see Dricus du Plessis as the number 2 guy in the world, if not number 1, just based on the fact that, you know what, this is the guy that's going to face Israel Adesanya. Now, I mean, not only did he earn it, he had a great storyline going on with Izzy. And here's the thing, Izzy was the one who sort of instigated the whole situation, which I think is great. I think that's awesome, because let's face it, the guy just didn't have a lot of contenders going on in his career right now. He's basically ran through everybody. Now here's this fresh face in Dricus du Plessis, and now he's got a fresh matchup with a great storyline behind it. And on top of that, look, let's just be honest about something. Racial implications in fights, people love that. Why? Because let's just be honest about it, right? To the fighters, it is a sport. It is an endeavor. It is a business. It is something that involves their livelihood. But to the fans, you got to understand something. It is a tribal matter at hand. Because you got to think, are there people out there that, let's say, are upset that, Izzy made this into, a whole racial fiasco of a fight? Yeah, there's people that are going to be very upset at that. But then also, there's going to be people that love that. There's going to be a lot of people that are going to support Izzy in the things that he say, especially that he's fighting a South African guy, right? And here's the thing. I've met a lot of South Africans during my day, right? And I can tell you that a lot of them, they're not racist per se, right? I mean, are there South Africans that hold certain sentiments in terms of racial implications or racial microaggressions or macroaggressions to that extent? Yeah, that is a reality. But for the most part, a lot of them are just like anybody else in the world, especially in terms of being athletes. They're just like everybody else that wants to get on with their lives, that wants to compete, that wants to prove to the world that they are the best at their craft. And Dricus du Plessis is no different than that. By the way, how about the fact that he went and shook Donald Trump's hand tonight after that win, right? So, you know that a lot of people are going to use that particular photo op of him shaking hands with Donald Trump cage side after he won that fight and use that as some sort of implications to whatever narrative they want to push. But nonetheless, you got to understand that when it comes to race and fighting, it goes hand in hand. There's this 90s movie called The Great White Hope, right? Or The Great White Hype. It was with Damon Wayans, where Damon Wayans plays a heavyweight championship boxer, right? And he's in the storyline, he's a heavyweight championship boxer who basically ran through everybody. Until there was this one guy that he had fought during the amateurs in which had beat him, right? Because everybody who is a top-level fighter, there's always that one guy in their amateur career, whether That's if you're a mixed martial arts fighter, and then you had this tough wrestling opponent that you had when you were in high school, when you were in college, or when you were in the Olympic levels of wrestling, or let's say if you were now a top level MMA fighter and you lost to some guys in jiu-jitsu, or in Izzy's case, a guy that he lost to in kickboxing that later followed him into mixed martial arts and beat him for his title, only for him to come back and beat him again. Right? There's always that one guy. Well, in the Great White Hope story, this guy who was Damon Wayans' opponent, the antagonist or protagonist, or however you want to view him in that story. He was a guy that had lost to, that Damon Wayans lost to this guy, right? And then this promoter wanted to bring in a Great White Hope, because what did Damon Wayans' character do? He was beating everybody. So then he brings in this guy because he knows that he's a white fighter who fought somebody like Damon Wayans' character, who's a black guy who's dominating everybody, and it just creates this great storyline. Well, guess what? This is exactly what Dricus du Plessis and Israel Adesanya have going on. And here's the thing about it. Even though Dricus is innocent into all this situation, right? The fact that Israel Adesanya called him, the C word, he called him a cracker, he called him all these things, and then Israel Adesanya tonight, after the Dricus' win, he walks into the cage, starts dropping the N-bombs, saying all these crazy things. You know what? A lot of people are going to eat this up. Look, the way that we see this as fight observers, fighters, managers, coaches, all the people that are involved in the fight business, they're going to look at this like, you know what, nonchalantly. They're going to be like, this is fight promotion, this is nothing. But for the casuals and the normal fan base of people out there, they're going to eat this up in whatever direction they want to be at, whether they want to be in the racist side, or whether they want to be in a non-racist side, or whether they want to be in a condemnation side of this whole entire fiasco. But nonetheless, either way, great night of fights, right? Let me show you guys around where I'm at. See, look at this right here. Oh, you know what? Let's go move over there. So I can finish this off right over there. By the way, I'm at the Marriott in Anaheim, if you guys are around here. So look at this. How about this, huh? So there it is. I mean, so what else can I talk about with this particular fight? So what about what's his name? What about Volkanovski? What is up next for him right now? Ilia Topuria is a possibility in this entire storyline, but then there's also Islam in the wings of the entire storyline. But nonetheless, I think either direction that he takes in his career next, I think it's going to be a big blockbuster hit. Look, here's the thing. I think that if you fight in front of Donald Trump, okay, you have to take advantage of that. And I think that he's going to ride this whole thing out after the entire card, after the entire situation. He's going to take this and do something with it. Hopefully he does. That's what I'm hoping he does. But will that happen? We don't really know. But that's why they call it the theater of the unknown, right? Great night of fights. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. I'm going to go rewatch the whole thing, see if I had missed anything, and then probably make a video about it. But nonetheless, good night from Southern California.